Time now to check in with our 35th District House of Representatives, Dan Griffey and Travis Couture. Good morning, guys. How you doing?
Good morning, Jeff.
Good to talk with you and good to see you. It's been a busy couple of weeks here since we last checked in. I know there's been a lot of time. Dan, you were just telling me about some time on the floor you had, as well as some of these bills that are kind of starting to make their movement. And as we get closer to the end of the session, I'd imagine things are starting to get a little clearer in focus on kind of how the majority party is working through the things and what you guys in the minority party are doing to try to elevate what you're talking about here. Travis, let's start with you this time and tell me kind of where are we at? What are you seeing, especially with your position on your side of the budget work?
Yeah, so right now, I mean, we just got off the floor, so a lot of the policy bills have either died or made it past the House, and now the Senate bills are coming over. We're switching sides. Um, there's still the way it works is, the budget and tax bills don't come till a little bit later,
Mm-hmm.
and so right now we've got about till next week until we see the House Democrat budget proposal, which I assume will be, if you're considering a 12 to $14 billion deficit, what I'm hearing is that half of that deficit will be made up in with budget reductions or cuts, and half of it with new taxes. And so we don't know exactly what taxes those will be yet, but I highly suspect that the first one on the block will be a massive increase to the B&O tax.
Talk to me a
Uh,
little bit about kind of if it, let's start with the budget cut side of that. Do you have any sense of where that money they may find that, money in regards to budget cuts? Is it different? Is it all the departments across state government get a reduction in percentage? Are there some carve outs for law enforcement or education, or how does that work?
um, it, it's hard to tell exactly which cuts they will assume, but there is a universe of cuts between what Jay Inslee had proposed before he left office, and then also a little bit of what Bob Ferguson has proposed in the last month or so, which equals about $6 billion.
Hmm.
So if you're looking at a $12 billion deficit, that would be roughly half of it.
Sure.
There's a lot of different things in there. There's a little bit of cutting of administration across state government and higher education, but probably really not a whole lot. Um, the governor, even Governor Ferguson, even came out with a 1 day per month furlough for 2 years for state and some state employees. We'll see if that lands anywhere in the House budget at all, but there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. Some things that we're opposed to, like we don't want to close down our prisons.
Right.
So, like in the 35th district, we have a big issue right now. They want to close down Mission Creek, the women's prison up in Belfair. We're absolutely opposed to that, and we want our constituents to know that we're fighting to keep that open. That's a lot of jobs up in the north end of the county, and that low barrier women's prison serves women who don't belong in Purdy,
Right.
right? And so, and we don't actually believe that that will be a cost savings when we're in the midst of like a crime crisis in our state, where we are in the top five of every top crime category in the bad kind of way across the nation. Now is not the time to be closing prisons and releasing people into our streets. We should be cracking down on crime. That's just one example of many, and there's a lot of different things there. But I assume that amongst the Inslee and Ferguson cuts will be a host of things that the House Democrats bring to the table.
Dan, what have you been speaking on your time on the floor here? What was kind of your topic, your theme as well? And then two, talk a little bit about what you see as still continuing with those issues when it comes to uh, the culture of law enforcement in Washington. Again, Travis just mentioned how we're in the top. A lot of folks might at one time considered Washington a safe state, to kind of live your life and things like that. But we've seen those numbers changed dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years or so. So where are you at in kind of helping to push forth again this kind of revisit of kind of a positive frame when it comes to law enforcement and keeping folks safe in the state?
Well, I mean, I think the narrative around law enforcement has changed a bit. So we at least have the majority party talking well of law enforcement and acknowledging we need them. But I spend most of my time trying to delay or stop, I think, terrible policy when it comes to crime and punishment in Washington State. In my committee, we just on last Thursday, we had a guy who professes to work for the Public Defenders Association in Washington State, formerly incarcerated individual who was released by Jay Inslee, who was arrested shortly after testifying in our community and being praised by the community safety chair, right? At how he reformed. But I think, Jeff, it points out that we in the House Republicans are pushing hard against the narrative of just let everybody out of prison. We've let so many people out of prison that I think we've made mistakes, and we've let them out too quickly as well. And we've made mistakes, and we put people in a position of being less safe in their homes and their communities. And so I spend almost all of my time working on those. And to that end, we're pointing out that this is why majority party chair of the Community Safety Committee, why we push back. We think you guys are not discerning enough on who you want to release from prison. This guy had enough fentanyl to kill 2,800 people. He had crack cocaine. He had powder cocaine. He had baggies. He had illegal guns, and he also had measurement tools so we have him for intent to distribute, and he's being held on $1.5 million bond. Just last Thursday, he was touted by the chair of the committee as somebody that's doing it the right way.
I saw that, and that was a commutation from Governor Inslee before he left.
Yes.
So in that respect, what happens? So if you're commuted of a sentence, then are there any follow-up checks, or are you kind of just
No, there's follow-up. So when he's a commutation is different than a pardon, right?
right? Yeah.
And so he can be sent right back to the Hooskow to finish the rest of his time served, but he's going to do a lot more time now. But here's the problem: he was the picture poster child of the Defenders Association of reentry. So he would engage with those soon to come out, getting them prepared to leave the facility, and then helping them along their way. It begs the question, if you're doing that kind of operation, what actually are you doing? I mean, I want to ask those questions. I want the majority party to tell us the answers to that, because he could be setting these individuals that are being released early from prison up for failure. But the worst part is he could be teaching them to re-victimize society, and I want to know the answer. So I will be pushing back very hard on that. But many policies we were able to defeat on the House floor this year. Other ways, resentencing to let people out of prison earlier. I was against that bill because I want to know more information. I want to know, all the math. Prove to me they rehabilitated. If you can prove to me they're rehabilitated, then where's the peer-reviewed science that says this person is highly likely not to reoffend society? I want to be sure. We should not be putting more people out in a position to re-victimize yourself, your family, and my family as well.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
just tagging on to that, there was a bill that was passed in the House on actually some Democrats sided with Republicans to vote no. House Bill 1131, which would have made it easier for the clemency board to give pardons and clemency to hardened criminals. And we stood up on the floor because there's people in our community in Mason County in the 35th who we told the story of Caitlin Stitt, who lives in Mason County, whose father was murdered by a man named David John Lennon back in the 1980s. And every 3 years, they could try to go for clemency, and then that family is re-victimized over and over and over again. We told their story on the floor. It's important to tell our constituents' story on the floor, and we just don't think that you know, going from extreme circumstances to a reasonable or in the interest of justice, or as they call it, is a lower standard to release people into clemency or to pardon them for heinous crimes. We don't want murderers getting let loose to re-victimize families and communities in our area. We were able to stop that last time around. Me and Dan and Drew McEwen sent 100 letters to finally get Governor Inslee at the time to back down. And he did, but we shouldn't have to do that every single time. But they passed this bill to make the clemency board even more lenient than it is. And that's going in the wrong direction.
One of the things that I've been reading on the various social media pages in the Shelton, Mason County area, lots still talked about when it comes to the Parents' Bill of Rights, how parents are informed about things that are going on in their students' schools and school districts. Where are we at with any of the efforts that you've been pushing forth, Travis?
Well, we had a 6.5 hour fight on the House floor and we lost. They took a couple of our amendments, but they were very minor, work around the edges. Jeff, they argued with me whether they could, if your child was experiencing a medical emergency, if the school could immediately contact you.
Right.
And they said that they couldn't do it. That was a HIPAA violation. Jeff, it's not a HIPAA violation. I served in the medical profession for years. The scenario is a child is injured. The highest trained medical personnel is going to attend to that person. Then you're going to have a army of people looking up the personnel records or the kids' records for emergency contact, and somebody at the school is going to contact them. It's going to be that quick, Jeff. And there's no reason for them to argue against immediate notification. They made comments like, well, don't you want the nurse to treat your child? Yeah, absolutely I do. But that's not how it works. There are other people that work at schools, Jeff.
Sure.
And for them to say that they couldn't immediately notify the parents is offensive. And I think I think the passage of this bill is going to mean more parents are going to withdraw their kids from the K-12 education system. And because my seatmate says it all the time, the state doesn't own our children. We get to raise them till they're 18 years old.
So in that scenario, you're saying either the nurse calls first or delivers care, even though like in the school that my son goes to, I've been in the office. The nurse's office is right next to kind of the the secretaries or whatever. And so you're saying that because it's the secretary would maybe make the phone call, that's the violation?
No, it's the violation is what they try to do. They just want to argue, and they made a poor argument. The argument was they couldn't immediately notify family members if your kiddo was having a medical emergency. And I argued that it always happens that they do that because there are other people that work in the schools. It's not this nurse that is contacting the parents.
Right.
It's somebody that works for the school that contacts the parents.
Well, and I think what's important for people to know, if they're just kind of becoming aware of this debate or this topic for the first time, is last session we passed initiative 2081, the Washington Parents' Bill of Rights. Almost 500,000 people in the state of Washington signed that, and the legislature nearly unanimously passed it, including the very Democrats who seek to undermine it right now. And so what they've done is they essentially passed it knowing that they didn't want it to go to the ballot. They didn't want it to be on the ballot for the election, and they didn't want it. They didn't want to have a 2-year period where they couldn't amend it. So they passed it knowing they could come back this year and amend it. And so they have House Bill 1296, which undermines everything in the Parents' Bill of Rights, which as of right now is current law. It's current law this very moment. So like immediate notification if your child is sexually abused by a teacher in school, that's current law. Curriculum review, that's current law. So many other things. And we've lost a massive amount of trust in our communities And with K-12 schools, we spend more money than ever before, record amounts of money in K-12, 3 times that of inflation, and we have the lowest education outcomes in 3 decades. And this, as Dan said, the stunning disenrollment of kids from schools, which costs our schools money. And as you can look around Shelton or Pioneer or North Mason, they're all in the hole financially. So this lack of trust costs our schools money, and it actually does harm families. We want to rebuild that trust, and you can't rebuild it by stepping in between loving parents and their kids. Parents deserve to know immediately when something bad happens to their kids in school. They want to know that their kids aren't, reading pornography in the school library, which is another amendment they denied. They want to know if there's some kind of healthcare or mental health related record or thing or education records that the parents have access to those things immediately and not never, right? And that's part of the problem. They said it was confusing and they need to go clean it up. Well, what they're doing is basically stripping the parents' Bill of Rights initiative that was passed and putting in place not only what was there previous to that, but they've even went steps further, and including going down divisive paths, talking about gender expression. And so creating new definitions in the law. We had, like Dan said, that 6-hour debate, and we couldn't pass amendments to protect girls in girls' bathrooms or locker rooms. To have religious exemptions for things to protect students and families' religious beliefs.
We had one of our members gavelled because they described what was in one of the kids' sex education books. He was gavelled because it was too graphic and vulgar.
Oh,
he didn't use any vulgar terms. He used actual medical terms, and it was too vulgar. And again, we need to point out, if it is too vulgar to say on the floor of the House of Representatives in Washington State, it's too vulgar to be in an educational material for our kids. The disconnect is very frustrating.
I know you guys have a lot of support in the 35th. Obviously, you were reelected to your positions in that aspect. When it comes to trying to bridge some of these gaps in other districts, if somebody from another district is watching this interview and kind of learning a little bit more about these, are there other ways that they can bring this up to them? Or, if somebody from the 35th, they probably can't write the lawmakers in the 22nd or the 16th or those other districts, can they? Does that make an impact unless they're part of the...
Well, sure it does, right? So sending emails to us helps, because we'll elevate your voice like we always do, but sending emails to the committee chairs and to the Speaker of the House.
The other thing I've been seeing is a lot of folks are saying, if you don't support this or you do support this, go put pro or con on a message.
You can remotely testify in the legislature now. It is a really neat tool for you to write what you have to say, and I read them all the time. I wonder if the majority party ever does, but I do like to get a sense and a feel of especially where my district's at on something, because I'll represent them fiercely first, and then all of Washington a close second, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of folks would love to get a chance to, and we've done these in the past, but are you guys, along with maybe Senator McEwen, thinking of any sort of upcoming town halls to get through this, or is it something? Are these the type of events that happen afterwards?
We have a telephone town hall on with the three of us on the 25th of this month.
Okay.
So we'll get you the information. Love it if you could advertise that. But what we'll be doing is what we do every year in the telephone town hall is we will be calling. We purchase a list, and then we call those people in the 35th district on the list. And then it gives us we usually have pretty good engagement there, 300 or 400 people, which is usually better than the in-person town halls. So it's tough to cover this district. So we usually alternate between in-person town hall and then telephone town hall. This year we chose a telephone town hall.
Sure. And we do polling during the town hall where people can press a button, yes or vote yes or no? Do you like rent control, right? I mean, stuff like that, or should we raise taxes or not? And so we get data back from that. And unfortunately, you can't go all night, so not everybody gets to ask the question, but we're screening the questions ahead of time. So, when we see 100 people ask the same question, we get one in there for that. And it's just a good way when you have such a large district that's a little bit bigger than the size of Rhode Island to contact as many constituents as once. But some people get confused because the number calls their landline or their cell phone or whatever, and they don't know what this is
Right.
until. So we try to send a voicemail out first saying, here's what this is and how you can participate. But last session we had record amount of participation, thousands and thousands of people. I think it was like 3,000-4,000 people in that telephone town hall. And so we're looking for
A little over 300 made it into the queue.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great.
And then we just also completed a mailer questionnaire as well. The three of us did that, and we were now processing the overwhelming response. It's quite clear that people think they're paying too much money for things. I agree. It's quite clear that they want more say in how their schools handle things. And they think crime is, out of control. And I agree with them on all of
Oh yeah,
those.
we've got thousands of those question cards we mailed out to every voter in the 35th. We got thousands and thousands. They're still coming in, and we're trying to tabulate all of the answers that people gave us in those postcards. But a lot of good information there.
I'm kind of just going back to what you guys were talking about earlier, and I think a lot of folks can land on the education aspect of their lives and how it impacts their families and generationally and things like that. And I wonder, and I don't know if this is even this could be a rhetorical question, but I wonder if on some of these, what sound to me like in our conversation, kind of common sense fixes or securities for families, if they were brought up by the majority party. I mean, just the fact that maybe the minority party is saying this stuff, it's automatically getting voted down, or I don't know if you want to kind of riff on that a little bit,
I
but
don't I don't think so, Jeff. I think the majority is trying to appear inclusive by saying they want to create a solution for maybe a 0.02% or even a 2% concern that we have in our schools, and that's how we deal with LGBTQ population. And they want to do it universal, right? And they want to change all the rules so everyone has a level playing field. And I talked to you before about showering with transitioning females. I think that's unconscionably painful to young girls. Showering, if you remember right, just having to shower in middle school, that was a traumatic issue for me. And
yeah,
and showering with other males, I don't like doing that still to this day, Jeff. So talk about a young girl that might be surviving sexual assault or domestic violence and having to face that. And they don't even give them like a warning shot. The person's put in there, here's Mary. Mary has a penis. You will shower with her. And if you look at the way Tumwater handled it, when the young lady decided she wasn't going to play in the basketball game, she was demonized in the beginning. Well, Tumwater did the right thing and passed a policy and said, hey, we're not going to have males competing against females. Now, I don't want to sound all anti-LGBTQ. I'm not. Our schools should be expected to enforce the anti-bullying laws that we have in Washington State, and that means everyone's protected. Just because a lady does not want to shower with a male, that doesn't mean she is being disrespectful or anything like that. She can determine when she wants to mature, when she wants to have exposure to that. And I find it sad that that's how they want to fix it.
And I think too,
in Washington State.
On that issue as well, the legislature themselves may not be necessarily taking up that. They're waiting kind of for an OSPI mandate kind of I think it's supposed to happen in the next month or less, around April. So they're not.
The mandate from Human Rights Commission, Jeff, is clear that the schools have to provide shower accommodations for those in transition, and it must be fully inclusive. So that means because they want them to have a full life experience, and the narrative is if they don't have the full life experience where they're actually showering with the females, then they don't get to live the full female life. Again, I reject Lee on its face. I mean, I reject that on its face, right? There's nothing about causing harm to others to fix someone else's or to accommodate someone else that is acceptable to me.
Well, and I just think that it's important to point out that, not always in society do we agree on the path forward, but that's why we have a rule book called our Constitution. And parents have the 14th Amendment rights, as the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled over and over and over again, including cases like Troxel v. Granville in Washington State, where it says parents have the ultimate rights for the upbringing and education and the healthcare decisions of their children, unless there is child abuse or neglect. And so, separate from abuse and neglect, parents have this fundamental natural law constitutional right, and you cannot go and infringe and erode that in seek of some policy prescription in state statute. And that's part of the problem. And we have had the slow erosion of those constitutional parental rights in this state over the course of 40 years. And parents are starting to wake up to it. They're sick of it in our schools. And like Dan said, we're protecting this less than 1% population, and are we really? We're not even really protecting them. As a matter of fact, I think it's kind of wild to say that. Well, we need some of these pornographic books in our school libraries because LGBTQ kids might want to read those. I mean, that's nuts. I don't care if you're an LGBTQ kid or a straight cisgendered heterosexual kid. You don't need to be reading pornography in your school. I mean, sometimes I feel like I live in the Twilight Zone here, Jeff, and that's just one of many issues. And I think that in order to help save our schools, Democrats will say Republicans just want to tear apart public education. Well, we haven't been in charge for 40 years. We're not tearing it apart. You've already torn it apart. It's failing right now in every measurable way. We're the ones trying to actually save it. And one of the steps in saving it is you got to rebuild trust. And that rebuilding of trust is hard. It's hard to rebuild trust. And you can't do that by disrespecting constitutional rights of parents. And also, I believe it makes kids less safe as well when you do that. But you can, like Dan said, you can still protect against discrimination in schools. Nothing about the Parents' Bill of Rights says that go ahead and discriminate against anybody. It doesn't say, tear apart the rights of LGBTQ people. Nothing about it says that we already have so many things in our state law that protects those folks, and they would still be protected. But there is no reason why we should hide mental health records for a child who is thinking about killing themselves because they're confused and maybe going through a gender transition from parents. If that was one of my kids, I would go absolutely ballistic if the school hid from me the fact that my child had suicidal ideation from me. That is absolutely nuts. And I think that's the contrast here. And that's what we're trying to protect.
We are a little less than a week away from that telephone town hall. Of course, I'll promote that on the radio so people can be aware that they'll be getting a phone call and they'll get another phone call about that coming up here. And as always, you can reach out with questions to your representatives here, Dan Griffey and Travis Couture, also State Senator McEwen, as well as they continue to work hard on behalf of the residents in the 35th and the state. Always good talking with you guys. Very passionate about all the things that you're covering and trying to focus on. And I really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Guys.